In this video, I answer the question, what is self-leadership? And also go a step further and share with you some ways that you can cultivate your self-leadership. Self-leadership at its core is awareness of your own inner states and stories and vision and ways of being. It's also the ability to focus on and pursue some sort of vision or outcome or objective successfully. So self-leadership is tied to all sorts of outcomes in life, from full self-expression and joy and fulfillment, all the way to having a good job, making good money, and having a good life. So there are 5 core practices that I've observed in myself and in my clients that support greater self-leadership. And I'm going to share those with you over here on my whiteboard. Let's go. So there are 5 things that I've identified are really fundamental to helping you develop your self-leadership. Now the first, and I would say foremost, is self-awareness. Self-awareness is the ability to look inward and be honest with yourself and evaluate your own emotional state, physiological state, mindset, ways of being. It's really challenging because a lot of times the person that we lie to the most is ourselves. And so self-awareness begins with being willing to be vulnerable and open and honest with ourselves. To support self-awareness, it may take some practice. And what that looks like, at least what that's looked like for me, is slowing down and taking time to check in. Now that could be taking an hour a day to meditate, to journal, to process things in the morning or in the evening or both. And it can also look like taking a few minutes or even a few seconds, a few deep breaths before making a decision, before answering a question. One of the keys to having self-awareness from a leadership perspective, from a self-leadership perspective, is noticing our emotional state. A lot of times we just power through things. We were like, go, 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 get it done. I gotta finish this thing. I gotta get to this place. And we don't even take the time to say, wow, I'm feeling frustrated right now. I'm feeling irritated right now, or just to evaluate something that just happened because we're on to the next thing. So part of self-awareness is creating time and space to go inward. Another part of developing self-awareness is developing awareness about your stories and your beliefs about life. So in a nutshell, without getting too deep into this topic, when we're little, we often make up stories about the world. And what I mean about making up a story is, for example, I'll share with you a personal experience of mine. In my family, my parents valued excellence. They valued getting A's in school. They were Cuban immigrants, and they really wanted me to succeed and excel. And so they placed a lot of value on that, and I received a lot of positive reinforcement around getting good grades, about being a good girl. So I made up a story in my mind, in my little 5-year-old mind, let's say, that in order to receive love, I had to excel, I had to achieve, I had to be the very best, and I had to be perfect. Now, that might not make sense, but as a 5-year-old, it felt like a really good strategy. That's why I also talk about stories and strategies together. We make up a story, and then we develop a strategy to live our lives in alignment with that story, which means that I created a strategy through my whole childhood, adolescence, young adulthood to be excellent, to be the best, to strive and achieve. Now, that's not a bad strategy per se. It's not good or bad, but it is a strategy. And in some ways, it started to hold me back once I started my own business and I got into my 30s and even my 40s. Yes, I'm 40 years old. I know you're totally shocked and surprised. And what happened was that I discovered that that's not the best strategy for everything. It's not the best strategy for a relationship, for example. You can't be perfect in a relationship. In fact, part of a relationship is being vulnerable and imperfect. It's also not a great strategy as an entrepreneur to work 24/7 and to become a workaholic. So the stories and strategies we learn as children can turn into roadblocks as we get older and as we develop our own businesses and enter relationships with people. So that's why self-awareness is so important, to go in and excavate in your childhood, in your past, what are the stories? What are the strategies? What's your story around money? What's your strategy around money? Your story around work, Strategy around work, stories and strategies around relationships, around excellence, perfection, vulnerability. Everything has a story and a strategy, most likely. That when you have self-awareness, and it takes time to do this, you start to dig in and pay attention like, wow, I just realized I ruined this whole relationship because I was approaching it from this old story, this old strategy that I've always run as a pattern. And so self-awareness is the first step in snapping out of those patterns and creating new, more healthy and aligned patterns with where you want to go instead of where you've been. The next piece of self-leadership is establishing self-trust. Self-trust is a very big concept, but I will synthesize it down by saying essentially it's learning that you can rely and depend on yourself to keep your own promises with yourself. That means if you promise to go to the gym every single day, that you actually do it. It means that if you promise to eat a certain way or show up at a certain time, that you actually do those things. It's creating integrity with your word to yourself. What happens when we have self-trust is that when we can trust ourselves and rely on ourselves, number one, it helps other people be able to trust and rely on us because then we embody trustability. And believe it or not, it actually helps us trust other people more. What ends up happening is life is a mirror, right? It's a hall of mirrors. Everybody we meet is a mirror for something in ourselves, especially the people that we meet that trigger us. That's a whole nother conversation. But when we don't trust ourselves, generally what happens, the way that shows up is we don't trust other people, and we blame others for situations that really we could point the finger right back at ourselves. Self-trust also means that you honor yourself and you trust yourself not to sell out to please others, not to say yes when you really mean no. When you often sell out, let's say that you show up in a situation that triggers one of your stories or your strategies from childhood, and your response is to please others and to immediately jump into yes. When you do that, when you say yes, when in your heart you're like, oh, I really don't want to do this thing, you sell yourself out and you erode self-trust. Now, if you like this topic about leadership, I invite you to check out, I have an entire leadership playlist about self-leadership, congruent leadership, transformational leadership, how to cultivate leadership, the 6 E's of leadership, all sorts of great content about stepping up into your own greatness. So check out that link below in the notes and watch it when you're done with this video. The third piece of building self-leadership is to cultivate an empowered mindset. An empowered mindset is where you take responsibility for yourself. Someone who is empowered does not blame or shame or complain, but rather takes ownership and figures out how to be the solution. Now, that doesn't mean that you're necessarily at fault for any of the problems you're facing, but it does mean that you take accountability and responsibility for how it goes moving forward, that you take accountability and responsibility for what happens next. The opposite of an empowered mindset is a victim mindset. A victim mindset is where it's poor me, look at what happened to me, it's that person's fault. If that hadn't happened, I wouldn't be here. And while these are really normal feelings that I feel, that all of us feel all the time, there's a difference between allowing ourselves to feel that and letting that emotion and wave move through us, or staying there. Usually when we give voice to those feelings, we let ourselves get angry, we scream into a towel or a pillow, and we allow ourselves to have those feelings. Generally speaking, those feelings move through, as long as we fully feel them and express them. But a victim stays there. A victim tends to wallow in their victimhood or develops an entire worldview based on poor me, I'm a victim. There's a big and fundamental seismic shift that happens in life when we say, you know what, maybe it's not my fault, but I'm going to take responsibility for it. And this is just how life is. Life is unfair. Life happens differently for different people. Everyone has their own journey. Everyone has their own cross to bear. And this is my journey. When I think about this victim versus empowered mindset, it reminds me of, I wish I could remember the guy that wrote this book. I apologize for not remembering, but he wrote this book called The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. This guy had it all. He was an editor at a super fancy magazine in the UK. I think it was like Harper's Bazaar or something like that. He was a writer. He was a big deal. And he woke up one day and he had something that in medicine they call locked-in syndrome. Locked-in syndrome is he woke up one day and he could move nothing. He was locked into his own body. The only part of his body that moved was, I believe, his right eyelid. one eyelid. He could open and close it. He could blink. That's the only thing he could do. Other than that, he was locked in. Well, you know what he did? With his one eyelid, he and his nurse or assistant developed a communication system with the alphabet, and he blinked out an entire book. He blinked out the entire book, and the day that it was published, he died. He left this legacy for the world. That is the quintessential empowered mindset. He could have very easily just given up, given in, and said, I'm out, right? I don't want to live like this. I'm done. But instead, he took what was inside of him, because he was all there. His brain was still working, but his body wasn't. He said, I want to leave one last gift to humanity. That book won a Pulitzer Prize. That was his legacy. That was his gift from a place of empowerment. He was a victim of this horrible condition. And even so, he said, I'm not going to let this hold me down. I'm not going to let this prevent me from sharing my voice and my wisdom with the world. Isn't that powerful? That's leadership. The fourth element of developing and cultivating your self-leadership is your self-care. Self-care because it shows that you honor yourself. And when you honor yourself, just like the Hall of Mirrors I mentioned earlier, it means you also honor others. And when you can take care of yourself and hold your standards and your boundaries and honor your body, your physical self-care, your emotional well-being, it forces you to set up standards and boundaries. You can't take care of yourself in this world these days without standards and boundaries. And that's a huge piece of leadership. So I put self-care here because self-care establishes that energetic life force that you need to show up fully. So self-care helps you have more energy. It helps you feel more awake, more alive, more vital. It helps you be healthier, not have to deal with sickness. It helps you have emotional stability, right? If you're taking care of yourself, you're not going to put up with somebody treating you poorly. You're going to establish a boundary on that. So taking care of yourself creates a lot of leadership because you're required to express yourself, to ask for what you need, to say no instead of yes. There's a lot of beautiful things that happen once you put self-care as a priority. And then finally, the last element is perhaps the hardest, truth telling. The reason I think it's perhaps the hardest is because I think that we oftentimes confuse love with lying. What I mean by that is that because we love somebody, we don't share the truth. We don't help them look in the mirror. We don't share things that are uncomfortable. We, for example, instead of face-to-face having a conversation, a truth-telling conversation with a client, we might just say, oh, I'm just going to let that client go. Just good riddance. I'm not going to say anything. When I talk about truth-telling, I'm talking about, number one, most importantly, truth-telling with yourself. That's part of that self-awareness thing I mentioned earlier. But not standing with ourselves in a lie. That's how my mentor, Nani Leah Diamond, puts it. Not standing with ourselves in a lie. So the first most important person we need to be truthful to is ourselves. And once we've mastered that, especially through self-awareness, we need to look at truth-telling with others. And that can be one of the hardest things we can do. Because as humans, we don't want to disappoint people. We don't want to hurt people on purpose. Generally, we want to love people and we want people to love us back. And sometimes if we tell the truth, it feels like people are going to reject us, they're going to hate us, they're going to be angry or upset at us. So one of the best things you can do for self-care is cultivate the art or cultivate the skill of telling the truth, of speaking the unspoken to people with love. I like to say truth supported by love. Truth supported by love. That means that it's not love supported by truth, love coming first, but rather truth being the most important thing. And for leadership, it is essential. This is what's missing in so much of our leadership in this world, is this idea of really speaking the unspoken. These days, now more than ever, it seems harder and harder for people to speak up and speak out about what they really believe. There's a lot of canceling and diminishing and criticizing and judging different points of view. And if you're going to step into leadership, you've got to be willing to tell the truth. You got to be willing to call it out. And you got to be willing to take a stand and to face the fire. And so the first person you got to tell the truth with is yourself, and practicing telling the truth supported by love with others. One of my favorite things to do in the whole wide world is to talk to other leaders and find out how they cultivated their leadership, what they're doing in the world, and ask them to give advice to people like you and me to help us develop our leadership. And so the place that I do that is on my podcast. If you've never checked out my podcast, I invite you to click the link below or visit thesuperstarpodcast.com. I've got about 76 interviews with badass leaders from all walks of life and all industries, sharing their best information, including me, by the way, with you. So enjoy.